I'm Bob Short. This is Reflections on Georgia Politics, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia and Young Harris College. It's May 6, 2015. We're in Rome, Georgia, with Charles Graves, a former state representative, former executive director of the Georgia Democratic Party, former aide to Congressman John Davis, and well known throughout the country. Charles, we're glad to have you.
Thank you, Bob. Good to see you again.
Good. Tell us a little bit about Charlie Graves before we get started here.
Well, I grew up over in East Rome, which was not the most affluent section of town. And my dad was a minister, but he also worked as a dry cleaning man. I had a couple of brothers and an older sister. We weren't destitute by any means, but we weren't very well off financially either. And so, but I had good parents and grew up in Rome. Spent a good many of my days at the Maple Street Community Center here in Rome, which was a community center that was started by a Baptist minister and his wife. A lot of the boys from our part of town, that was a place we could go and be safe in the afternoons. And so went to high school here. Became a boxer at one time, boxing in the Maple Street Community Center, and then I went on to fight in the Golden Gloves, and that's how I ended up as a Marine. The I&I director for the local Marine unit got to know us all and come over and hold our bags and talk to us about joining and promised us the world if we had joined. And so we, 4 or 5 of us joined up to be able to fight for the Marine Corps. And the next day after we signed, he forgot who we were. But it was fine. So anyway, I grew up here, and Rome is my home. Except for the times I was in Washington and about, but great place to live.
Well, you're a newspaper man.
That's correct. I was very fortunate. As I said, we're not well off, but I was in the distributive education program at Rome High School, where I went to school half day, and then I was at noontime. I left school to go to take a job downtown. Helped me have a little money to spend. There was an instructor there whose name was Frances Beal, who was over that DE program. Great lady. Her job was to conduct classes. We were trying to teach us a little bit about business, but also to get us jobs around. And my first year in the DE club, I was in a department store here in Rome and worked there. And then my second year, as I was graduating from high school in 1957, the newspaper here in Rome was needing what would essentially be a copy boy, someone to come in to early in the morning to clean the wire stories off the AP, UPI machines, roll the tapes that then came along with them, and then work to prepare the photographs for the paper. Back in those days, you had a Fairchild engraving machine where you put the photograph on one side and had a plastic piece on the other, and then it transferred it. So that was my job. She asked me to go interview for that job, and she could have picked another person, but she picked me to do it. And so I went down to the newspaper as we were graduating, interviewed, got the job, and that began my newspaper career as a copy boy.
Yeah, but you became, city editor?
Yes, after a year or so at the paper doing the copy boy work, I began to go back to the newsroom, and I would get them to let me do obituaries and little Roman announcements. Meantime, I was going to off campus, taking courses, and I was going to school up at Shorter. So gradually, I worked into a reporter's position. I'd covered primarily the courthouse, the police beat, worked in that role and did some feature writing. But Was there for about 5 years as a reporter and covering some very interesting stories, one of which was the Bertha Gossett Hill case. You may have heard about it sometime in the past.
Tell us about it.
Very interesting story. Bertha Hill had been a local person here back in the 40s, and she was married. She was manager of a little department store down here, a floor manager. Her husband became ill, and she very suddenly and passed away, and there was some suspicion about it. So they did an autopsy and determined that he had died of arsenic poisoning. And so people got talking, as they did back then, that her parents had died very close together. So they went over to Alabama and exhumed both parents, and both of them had died of arsenic poisoning. So they tried Bertha for murder. That was back in the 40s. I had 2 trials, actually. The first trial went for a while, and they convicted her, but the case was overturned on a technicality. They brought her back to Rome, and the fellow who later became Superior Court Judge, Mack Hicks, was the prominent lawyer in this area, a very strong defense attorney. He was selected to defend her on this second trial. They went for a long time in the trial phase. Then the jury went out, and at that time, the jurors all stayed in one room at the courthouse. They slept on cots if they had to stay overnight. This jury stayed out 78 hours and came back and found her guilty. They polled the jury, and the jurors said that they voted her guilty. Well, they sent her off to prison, and she stayed about 12 years. Then out of the blue, an attorney from down in Griffin, Georgia, shows up one day and files an extraordinary motion for a new trial. The extraordinary motion has to be one that has evidence that wasn't known and could not have been known at the time of the trial. And that was based on the fact that 3 of the jurors that they had signed affidavits saying they didn't vote her guilty, they just agreed to go along because they had been in that jury room 78 hours and they were sick and they wanted to get out of there, so they just voted to go along. Well, of course, Judge Hicks had recused himself from the case because he had been her defense attorney. He named Judge J.L. Davis over in Cartersville to hear the case. Well, they brought her back to Rome, and the day they brought her back to Rome, here I am, a young, fresh police reporter. I go over to interview her through her cell door. She comes to me, and I'm talking to her, and I just point blank ask her, "Did you kill your husband and parents?" And she looked straight at me and said, "Do you believe I could have lived with myself if I'd done all that?" Well, over a period of months, it actually was over months because of the hearing process, I got to know her pretty well because I went to the jail every day to check on the dockets and see what was happening, and I'd go back and talk to her. After a while, got to where they didn't keep her cell locked because she was just a fixture around there, and she would have her sewing machine. I'd go and sit on her cell chair by her and talk to her. And I was following all the appeals process that it was going through. And even one time I remember at Thanksgiving when the long cook at the jail, Sam Edwards, was sick. She went in and was cooking at the jail. So it was a different world back in those days. But finally they came back and they ordered a new trial for her. But she couldn't, the state couldn't try her because all the witnesses were gone. And so it ended up that they had to let her go, but they indicted those 3 elderly men, those elderly jurors, for perjury, saying that they had purged themselves. I had a justice of peace to go out with me, and I interviewed each one of them, wrote their stories down, and came back, wrote the statements down, came back and wrote my story. They called me to the jury, called me to the court. After that, and the fellow who had told me in the greatest detail about what happened, they called him to stand. They had me sitting out in the audience, and they said, "You recognize this young fellow over here?" And he said, "Well, I think I may have seen him somewhere before." Anyway, they didn't want to put him in prison. They just wanted to set an example. But one of the most unique cases, and that's been very popular in this area of retired policemen wrote a book about her, Bertha, and sort of a historical novel, and it's pretty active now.
Well, tell us how you got interested in politics.
Well, I was working at the newspaper, and the Speaker Pro Tem of the House at that time was Bob Scoggin. He was a lawyer here in town, and Mac Hicks, the judge I was just speaking about, was the presiding Superior Court judge. We only had one. And Bob decided he'd leave the legislature and he would challenge Judge Hicks for the Superior Court judgeship. And he asked me, I knew him, you know, from courthouse and whatever, and he asked me if he could actually hire me, but pay me a little bit on the side to help him with his advertising. And so I agreed to do that, and I helped him. Ironically, my boss at the time was a fellow who was going through an adoption, and Judge Hicks was going to hear that, so Judge Hicks drafted him to help his side in terms of advertising, and so we'd sort of course, the editor was my mentor. He was like my father, but we were doing different things. Anyway, working with that campaign, luckily Scoggin carried the county very handily and won that race, and so I went back to my work as a newspaper man. As a virtue of that, I think, I know the congressman from this district, John Davis, whom I didn't really know. I'd covered a couple of times when he'd been speaking here. When he was first running, he needed a press person in Washington. So he talked to Scoggin, I think, and remembered me from my covering his case. And I was in class at in fact, I was actually doing Shoulders publicity on a sideline job, and they paid me and paid for my tuition. And he called me one day and offered me a job in Washington, and here I was, a young guy, I'd never done much traveling or whatever, except go to Washington as a school board patrolman. And so he offered me the job, and I packed up a wife and 2 young kids and moved to Washington.
What was your job with the congressman?
My first job, as I was first there, I was his press aide, press secretary, and I was responsible for handling the press coverage of the press, getting out news releases of his activities. And then when he came back to Georgia, we had recesses. I would set up a breakfast in one town, a lunch in another, and a dinner in another, so we could cover the district pretty well. I also was responsible for ushering district constituents around when they came to Washington to visit. It'd be up to me to take them to the House chamber and the Senate chamber and tour them around inside the Capitol. I think I went to Mount Vernon more than Washington did. But it was a different day. The contrast I see now in Washington as opposed to what I observed as a young man there. I mean, we had Carl Vinson from Georgia in the House, and we had Gerald Ford was minority leader at the time. We had, they would debate and take up issues, but they were civil. And you never saw one run out in the hall and jump on national television and criticize the other. They might debate each other very heatedly during that session, but they were friends and they were respectful. Same thing on the Senate side with Senator Russell and Everett Dirksen, all those folks. I'd go over and watch them. It's just today it's a different world.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about Congressman Davis.
Congressman Davis was a brilliant individual. Congressman Davis had been a circuit Superior Court judge. He lived in Somerville at the time, although he grew up in Rome. His father was an attorney, actually was virtually deaf, his father was. Congressman Davis was a very, very, very good person at first class, very moral and very ethical man. He moved to Somerville and practiced law for a while there, and then was elected to a judgeship that covered 2 or 3 counties in that district, in that judicial circuit, which also was part of the 7th District Congressional District. So when Irwin Mitchell decided not to run again after his second term, Congressman Davis was one of several candidates who entered that race and was elected. He was an intellectual, he was not a real good politician. He was not one to run out and wade through a crowd very much and be glad handers. But he was brilliant. We could come down to the district on trips and be riding around from lunch to dinner or whatever, and he could talk about the mountains or about the stars or tell you his history. He was a great friend of history. Even single-handedly from scratch built a hi-fi system one time. So anything he got interested in, he just really got enmeshed in. Mm-hmm. He was, like I say, he was not a true sense of the word politician, and he probably did not keep as close contact with his constituents as he might have. He served 14 years. I served the first one. I went to Washington in the early 60s, and I stayed for 2 years as the press aide. And after I worked with him through the campaign, he had his first campaign with Congressman Larry McDonald, I think it was. I decided I would not go back to Washington. I would come back home, and I did. And then later on, I went to back with a newspaper after a short stint in radio. And then when he ran again in 1964, he had asked me to be in charge of the staff if I could stay home and be AA of the Georgia staff as well as the Washington staff. And I went back to work for him and stayed another term during that time. But I was there during my first group with him was when Kennedy was elected, or when he was there, and when he was assassinated, and that was really a historic thing to see firsthand.
Mm-hmm. So you worked with Congressman Davis, and then what happened next?
Well, after I left with Congressman Davis was defeated in 1964, and so happened that George Busby, with whom I had served in the state legislature, was running for governor. And so I had a couple of staff people that we had campaign staff people, and we sort of moved into the Busby headquarters and helped coordinate some of the area in our congressional district for him. That was in 1974, 74. And so I volunteered and worked down there in the general election campaign, and then when he was elected, he asked me to become executive director of the state Democratic Party, and so I took that job. Was there for 5 years.
Mm-hmm. You knew the Kennedys.
Well, I had exposure to the Kennedys. It was a very interesting thing to me, just as memories. My first exposure to Kennedy was when he was running in 1960. He had sort of wanted to establish an identity of his campaign with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And one of the things he did was come down to Warm Springs to make a talk on the little White House porch, the little small porch there. And so at that time, Davis was the Democratic nominee for Congress, having won the primary, and this was going into the general election. And so I was with Davis and a group of folks from Rome who went down to Warm Springs to see the candidate, Senator Kennedy, speak. They put the congressman on the little porch right behind Kennedy and me with him because I was with Davis, and we stood there during his talk, and we were as close as here to you almost, small porch, and crowded us in. And it was amazing what a turnout we had for this liberal senator from Massachusetts. And one of the things I remember most is that when he finished speaking, he was going to wait out and shake some hands, and this crowd on the porch also was converging. So I stood up in a chair to shoot some pictures to get some overhead shots, and somehow or another my chair got knocked, but I was just sort of rode on the shoulders of the crowd for several feet before I could get down. I kept shooting pictures, and so but it was amazing about that, and that I saw that. And then when I was in Washington, of course, in '63, in November, when he was assassinated, I was in my office, Congressman's office, and I was in the outer office. And if you might remember Ted Lippman was from Atlanta Constitution, and he was covering the Washington, the Capitol beat at that time, and he was in with the congressman interviewing him about some subject. And the lady from the next door congressional office came running in. She came running in and asked us if we had heard that the president had been shot, and we had not. And I picked up the phone immediately and called my house and asked my wife out in Virginia, have you heard anything about President Kennedy being shot? She said, yeah, it's on television now. So I ran into the congressman and said, President Kennedy's been shot. And I'll never forget the look on Ted Lippman's face. He just turned ashen white. And I don't think he said 2 words. He jumped up and flew out of our office going to the White House. And so Washington died that day. Washington, you could walk out on the street and people walking down the street crying, unashamedly crying. It was just a real sad time when Washington just lost its fervor and spirit. Mm-hmm. I was also, they brought his body to the Capitol to Lions State, and I had kept my old Rome News Tribune press card all my time, and we had a little Shikamac camera. It was a flash camera. It didn't even have a strobe unit. So I decided, Saturday morning I had to go down there. So I go down real early, and I go to the office, and I get that little camera, put it around my neck, and had a flash on it. And I put my News Tribune press card in my wallet, and they had the Capitol area all monitored off, and sanctioned off. And so I went up to this first Capitol Hill policeman. They were much friendly because they were all pretty much appointed by congressmen, and told him who I was. I needed some crowd shots, and so he let me get through because it was really not crowded at all then. He let me go through, and once I got through, nobody else challenged me. They thought I was legitimate, I guess. I got on the Capitol steps and tried to be as inconspicuous as I could be. It wasn't very long until 2 plainclothes guys, one of them was, I'm sure, Secret Service, and one of them was the CID people, military, had control of that whole area. It's a military area. So I tried, I took some pictures around as things were gathering and trying to just stay out of sight. I saw one of the agents was looking around. I knew he was looking for a cigarette, and I smoked back in those days. So I went down, gave him a cigarette, and lit it for him, sort of struck up a conversation. Then the crowd began to grow and grow and grow, and this was a couple hours later. Right at the final thing, as things were getting settled, this colonel in uniform came around checking all the IDs on the steps because they just had a pool of reporters they'd brought in, one TV crew and a couple of others, and very few others. And he was checking everybody's identification. Well, all I had was my Rome News Tribune press card, and I said, he's going to put me in jail. And so just as he got to me and I started reaching my pocket, this agent that I'd given a cigarette to said, he's okay, Colonel, I just checked him. Colonel walked right on by me, and I was about to stay there the whole time, standing right behind Pierre Salinger when they brought the body in. They brought the body in the casket, and then, of course, Mrs. Kennedy and 2 children, and Bobby behind, and Lyndon Johnson came up, and they were in there a little while for the ceremony, and then the group started coming back out just of the Capitol, and when they did, I have a picture of my home that I'd shot of Mrs. Kennedy and the 2 children. She was taking the first step off the Capitol, the first step down, and you could see part of Bobby's head behind him. And I heard the TV guy who had an earpiece on with network whisper and say, just got Oswald in Dallas. That was a pretty memorable time to have happened.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. One time I was able to go to a time when Kennedy spoke to I think it was the budget or State of the Union speech, and I was in the congressional gallery, and right straight across you could see the president's gallery, his wife and his sister-in-law, Ted Kennedy's wife, and all of them. And I decided I wanted to look at them a little closer. And so we were instructions when the speech was over to go out and turn right and go down. Well, I wanted to see them a little bit closer, so when I went out, I turned to the left. And I was going down the hall, and there had been a Secret Service agent in our gallery that I was in. And I reckoned, I saw who he was. I knew he was there. Well, I didn't pay attention when I left. I was going to go down. I really want to take a look at Joan. She was a pretty nice looking lady. So I got about halfway down and I felt something right behind me, and I turned around and looked, and there was this agent. Instead of walking right behind me, I just got off to the side, and when I got off to the side, he stood there, and then when they came by, he turned around and left. But I had gone the wrong way. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your elective career.
I had never even dreamed of running for office, to be honest with you. Never thought about it much. I enjoyed the political side. I enjoyed working, doing the work, but I never pictured myself being a politician. But I had come back from Washington, and I had was working for a radio station for a short time here, and a friend of mine, Ben Lucas, who was a very prominent fellow around here. Ben and I, when Jerry Minge was appointed judge, he was the incumbent legislator. He was appointed state court judge and gave up the seat in the middle of the term. And just overnight, they were going to have a qualification for somebody to fill that seat. Ben Lucas and I talked about it for some reason. And I'm not sure whether we flipped a coin or whatever happened. But anyway, I ended up running, and with no idea in my life of ever running up until that juncture. And so there were 5 candidates in the race: former police chief, former school superintendent, the labor leader that was there, and in the race, 5 of us in the race. And our good friend Cap Hicks and I worked together on the police beat, and he told me at the county jail, "You ain't got a chance." Said Smith Horton knows, he was former police chief, said Smith Horton knows everybody in this county, kin to all of them. Said, "You ain't got a chance." Well, I worked real hard, didn't have any money, but I worked just every county road, everybody I could see, I worked hard, and I ended up in a runoff with Mr. E.B. Tolles, who later got elected, and I was able to win that runoff and serve, but it was strictly shoe leather, and I guess I'd gained some because of my newspaper bylines and the fact that I'd worked with Davis helped me. Mm-hmm. So that put me down there, and I never had even dreamed about being an elected official.
Right. So you go down to the State House of Representatives. Who was the speaker then?
George L. Smith was a speaker. Great guy from down in Swainsboro. He was a very congenial fellow. Cagey politician, but a very fair person. Famous for smoking a cigarette and holding it right between his teeth, and he gave me the committees I wanted to be on. I wanted to be on the Special Judiciary Committee because I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew a little bit about that. He put me on the Education Committee, and sort of unheard of for a freshman, he also put me on Rules Committee. And so, but he was a good, fair man, and I think was universally respected in the House. At that time, George Busby was Majority Leader, and Speaker Murphy was the floor leader for Governor Maddox at that time. So it was a interesting time to be in there. Of course, Democrats were predominant. There were very few Republicans in there, and it was just as it is now by Republicans. At that time, it was totally controlled by the Democrats.
How well did you know Governor Maddox?
I knew Governor Maddox fairly well. I liked him. I think he was a genuine fellow. I had a couple of experiences with him. If you want me to, I'll relate to you. One of the first things I remembered about him, I liked about him, is he was the first governor ever to live in the governor's mansion. They were building it prior to the time, I guess it was Sanders, whatever, they built it. But he was the first governor that went in, and so right after the session began, they invited us out to the mansion, to the legislature, to the mansion, the House members, to tour it and get to see it. Well, we get there, and Mrs. Maddox, who was just a gracious lady, she was in the kitchen helping folks in the kitchen, the kitchen staff, and Governor Maddox was running around like he always does, having fun. But the first thing he wanted you to see was his bathroom. And the reason he wanted you to see his bathroom was because he had a phone in it. And you know, most people back in those days didn't have telephones in their bathroom, but he had one in that phone. So he was a gracious host, but I got along with him fine. One time I had a disagreement with him. As I said, I was on the education committee, and there were a lot of segregationist types of bills being introduced in those days. A lot of friction. So a bill was introduced in the House that would require any local board of education, before it could close even a little elementary school or move it or whatever, before it could make a change, you'd have to have a vote of the entire county to do that. Well, it came up in the committee one morning, and Mac Barber, if you remember, Mac Barber was chairman of the committee, and when he brought it up, I made the motion that we not pass, to kill the bill, and the motion was adopted. No sooner than I got down to the back to the chamber and started in my seat, and one of the governor's aides came by and said, Charlie said, if you've got a minute, the governor would like to talk to you. And I said, okay. So I go down there, and this was his habit. He always grabbed you by the hand, and he said, hello, hey, sport, and he'd pull your hand back and forth. He was very gracious to me that day. And so he sat down, and he started telling me that, he said, Mr. Graves, he said, Sport, I got a bill up there in the House I need your help to get out. I said, what is it, Governor? And he told me the number. And I said, Governor, I hate to tell you this, but the committee's just considered that bill, and I made the motion to kill it, and I want to tell you why I did. So I went into this litany about we're representative democracy. We have people elected from truck drivers or doctors who don't have time to pay all their full attention to school, and that's why we get people to represent us. And I said, we can't take all that burden on ourselves. We got to have somebody to represent us. He wasn't rude at all, but he got up and stood around, walked around his desk and stuck his hand out and said, thank you for coming by, Mr. Graves. From then on, he never called me anything except Mr. Graves. Never Sport, never again. But I liked him.
Yeah.
I liked him.
What are some of the legislative bills you were interested in while you were there?
Well, one of the biggest things that we had down there that we played a pretty good role in was that the state had begun to build regional mental health facilities. There had been a big expose, I think you remember, by Jack Nelson many years ago about all the crowdedness and the maltreatment of all of our mentally ill people down at Reedsville. I mean, Milledgeville, not Reedsville, at Milledgeville. And it was just overcrowded, understaffed, and there's something needed to happen. So the state made the wise decision to decentralize Milledgeville and build regional hospitals. And they built one. I've forgotten which town it was in. Anyway, they had built the first one, and we decided up in Rome that, we were in Northwest Georgia, largest town at that time in Northwest Georgia, and then we would be an ideal, appropriate site for one. So the night before the legislative session was to begin in 1967, I guess, 68 or 9, we met with George L. Our delegation met with George L. And I think Sam may have been there. And we down at the old hotel where everybody gathered up before the sessions, stayed there on Sunday nights, and we got Speaker aside and said, we're going to have to try to get our hospital in. He said, okay. He said, I don't blame you. He said, I understand, but the budget was tight. And Sloppy Floyd, our neighbor and legislator, whose county would benefit from the hospital, was chairman of appropriations, and he had these big signs, hold the line. Didn't want any more money being spent. So we had him in a bind. But George L. said, I don't blame you. He said, you got to do what you got to do for your constituents. You go right ahead. So we felt pretty good about that. So we got the bill. What we did was we formed a coalition with, I think it was Augusta and Columbus, that we would all vote the same way, and we'd all get out and corral as many other votes as we could and get enough votes to pass it. Well, nobody knew what we were doing, and nobody thought we really had a shot at getting the bill passed through that time. At that time, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee ruled over the budget negotiations in the what they call the Committee of the Whole House, and rather than Speaker, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee presided. Well, it came up, and when our the deal came up to be voted on, we made an impassioned plea, and I spoke for the bill on behalf of our delegation, had a vote, and we carried the thing by one vote. Well, I was a little naive about what was going on at the time, but all of a sudden this fellow came running from the back of the chamber and said, "Wait just a minute, Mr. Chairman, I didn't get a chance to vote." Well, Sloppy let him vote. He voted no and threw it in the tie, and so it didn't pass. Well, we raised sand about that. Sloppy got all upset, and he said, "All right," he said, "all you reporters get over in your den and stay there, and so the doorkeepers, you lock the door, so we're going to have one more vote." So we have another vote, and that time we lose by one vote. And when we lose by that one vote, we jump up and said, "Wait just a minute, we send this guy down there." He said, "We didn't get a chance to vote." I think it was a legislator from Mountain Cali. He said, "Well, I didn't get a chance to vote, Mr. Chairman." So he let him vote. That was another tie. Oh, Sloppy had a fit. So that's when he closed the doors. And so he said, "All right, we're going to wait a minute," and he get things organized. By that time, we saw George L. coming out of his office. He had been off the floor, and he was kind of wandering around. And had his cigarette. He'd go over here and talk to this little group for a minute, and he'd talk to this little group for a minute. It was about 20 minutes before we had another vote or anything. And he walked around, and you could see him just talking, just easy. Had another vote, and they beat us by about 25 votes. Speaker had changed all those votes. So we didn't get the hospital that year, but we got it the next year. We were able to get it the next year.
Okay.
That's one of the funny things.
Well, now let's talk about the Democratic Party. You were the executive director of the Democratic Party of Georgia back when it was strong, controlled all the state offices and had tremendous control over the legislature. Describe for us, if you will, the party at that stage in Georgia history.
As you say, the party at that stage was the party. We had very few elected Republican officials and not a very strong statewide Republican Party as such. So we were fortunate, and I was fortunate in the fact that I could raise money for the party. When I got there, I think the party was pretty well, they'd spent all the money they had. I think they had like $1,600 as I can remember, but the election was over, whatever. I went in December of 74. And so, but we had the ability to raise some money. Most industries would support it. I created what we call the Governor's Club, in which people would pledge so much a year, and then we'd have a function a couple of times a year where the governor would attend, and they'd have an opportunity to raise, rub elbows with him, and that was a successful thing for us to be able to deal with the party. We rewrote the charter for the state party during my early term. I had some very, very capable people who were attorneys there who helped us redesign the party, providing more openness. Early on, the governor always appointed delegates to the National Convention. They were not elected. They were appointed. The governor just handpicked who he wanted to go. For the first time while I was there, we actually had congressional district elections and elected delegates to go to the convention, which was a progressive start. We also, by national mandate, had to have a proportional representation from females and from minorities, and that we were able to implement during that time. I was somewhat in the hot seat a little bit, and I'll be open about it, and that is that the governor also names the chairman, or the party elects the chairman, but the governor, has a lot to do with it. Well, a gracious lady by the name of Marge Thurman was the chairman of the party, was elected. She pretty well a nominal chairman, executive director, pretty well ran the thing on a day-to-day basis. But Marge Thurman had been a strong supporter of Governor Sanders during his term, had served on the National Committee during his term. And then, of course, we had immediately after going things, and we had President Carter running for president, and they had not been friends, and so I had a little bit of a tightrope to walk between the Carter folks, and he was running for president, and Barnes, who was not a friend of Governor Carter, and it was pretty well an open fight. That there was no doubt that was the case.
Mm-hmm. Charles, what has happened to the Democratic Party in Georgia?
Well, I think it's probably has fell victim to two or three things. First of all, national politics has. They say all politics is local. That's the case at the local level, but the national issues to some degree have had an impact on Georgia politics and the Georgia Democratic Party. That has had a great deal of impact on it. Now, an example I can give you is that Tom Murphy, one of the strongest speakers ever to serve in this country, who did tremendous things for his district. World Congress Center wouldn't be here today in Atlanta had it not been for Tom Murphy. I mean, you can point for dozens of things that he did. He was pictured as a country lawyer, but he was far from a country lawyer. And he was a generous person. I remember he put Al Burris in a woodshed one time for running against him for speaker, kept him there for a couple of years, and then came out and made him a department head, took him out. But the point I'm making is they defeated, Murphy was defeated in his own district, simply because that area had moved more urban, more conservative. He had people moved into his district from other places. They had an R by their name. The Democratic Party was unpopular at the national level. And when they went to the polls, they gave up tremendous power just to vote no for a D and yes for an R. Mm-hmm. And so that's happened during that time. There's been a decline ever since. When you lose the ability, your financial ability to run an organization, whether it's a political party or a private industry, then you're really hamstrung. And a lot of the money, I'm sure, that used to flow to the Democratic Party through state corporations, individuals who gave money every year, who attended the Jefferson-Jackson Day dinner, which was a big source of our funding, that's been cut off. You don't have near the support that you had in the past, and so and then there, as you know from election results, there's a great deal of dissatisfaction with our current national administration, and so that has had an impact on Georgia. The party hasn't changed. Georgia party, most measures, Democrats in Georgia are just about as conservative as Republicans are. There are some various differences, but it's a national, I think, more so than a state. It's just a repercussion from national politics. But I'm a Democrat, and so I continue to be a Democrat. I'm a moderate Democrat, and I think that the Democrats at some point will come back. It's just a matter of time, but maybe not so in the same composition as before. But I think the Democratic Party will live. We've got DuBose Porter apparently is working pretty hard at this time, and I think you'll start seeing some local candidates run for the legislature and other positions as Democrats. Once they get over, they're afraid now. A lot of people are just afraid to admit to being a Democrat, and got to get over that before the party can come back.
What was it like in 1976 at the convention when your governor was the Democratic nominee for President of the United States?
Well, we were treated like royalty. We couldn't take all of the invitations. We went to the Club 21. We went to all these places, and I went up. It's sort of aside, but I was responsible as director of the party for settling on the housing for the Georgia delegation. So I flew up to to New York to meet with a person who was coordinating from up there. True story. I flew up on an Eastern airline plane, and but no idea that anybody was going to meet me. I knew where I was going, but I had no idea anybody was going to meet me. And I flew into New York on this plane, and we landed, and they started disembarked. The captain came over, or the attendant came over the loudspeaker and said, "Mr. Graves, your party will meet you at the foot of the gate, foot of the stairs." I didn't know who the party was meeting me at the foot of the stairs was. So I get down there, and here is the mayor's limousine, and the lady who was in charge of the housing for the convention down there waiting on me to take me out of the airport. And we went through New York downtown with the flags on his car, and they treated me nice. They didn't know I was a country boy from 20th Street, but anyway, it was interesting, and they treated us great. It was a great convention. We had, of course, Governor Busby was the head of the delegation, and we had all of our the delegates. We had a choice hotel that we wanted, and it was just a happy time for everybody. Had a great number of delegates. I think former Congressman Barra, Congressman Barra now, he was elected as the youngest delegate ever to attend the convention, and it was a heady time throughout the city.
Let's go back to the election between former Governor Maddox and State Representative Busby. You were there. Tell us about that race.
Well, George Busby was just a great guy, very personable. He never put on any airs about being governor, but he was smart as well. He was a smart man. He had a good following. He had built up a strong reputation among legislators as being somebody they could work with and deal with. And so Busby won because of himself. A lot of times people get elected because the other guy's worse. I think Busby was elected because he was the best, and that's the way he carried himself all the time. He was he was a workhorse, not a show horse, and I think that was true of him. And he didn't change actually during the time he was governor. He didn't change a bit that I saw. He's always very good to me. In fact, he is the one. Of course, when I after being in the Democratic Party, then he asked me to. I left the party to become Carter's reelection campaign director in Georgia, and then I went from there to Texas, and then I coordinated the Kentucky campaign in '80.
For Carter?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Were you surprised that he lost as badly as he did in 1980?
No, I'm not really. Not really. Because of circumstances, world circumstances, the Iran hostage situation, the drying up the gas prices going to the long lines for gas going on, all those things came together to just make it almost impossible. As I said, I did the Georgia campaign, which was really not much of a campaign. It was a foregone conclusion that we were going to carry Georgia, but we had to put on the semblance of a campaign, and we did. And we had a fairly amount of enthusiasm in Georgia, but not nearly so much as had been in '76. Mm-hmm. And then, as I said, from there I went to Texas. I was coordinated the Gulf Coast area of Texas, from Houston, Galveston, that area. A guy named Bob Beckel. You see him on Fox News now, I guess, now and then. Mm-hmm. Bob Beckel was out there before I got there, and he was in Austin. And I was going back to the same people who had been with us in '76, talking to them, trying to get enthusiasm. By most part, the leaders who had been leaders out there at that time, they were still supporters of President Carter, but they were browbeaten too, and they weren't really as willing get up and wave the banner as they had been in 1976. I recall that I was down in Galveston, Texas, on the morning that they attempted the hostage rescue, and I was in the morning and I saw it on the news, and I thought to myself right then, I might as well pack my bags and go home. This thing's over. And of course I didn't, but I thought we was in real peril at that time. But we went on and got by Kennedy, of course, and later on, and then but then I went to Kentucky to run the general election campaign in Kentucky. Kentucky was more of still to some degree was more democratic. We also had Wendell Ford, who was extremely popular up there. Governor John Y. Brown supported us tacitly. He was political. Martha Lane Collins, who later became governor, was a protege of Wendell Ford, and the two of them traveled around with us to make speeches, and we had a great campaign chairman up there. So in Kentucky, the things looked brighter than they did in Texas, but we ran a real close race in Kentucky, as it turned out. But the cards just weren't there. Mm-hmm. In the last few days, particularly the polling showed the momentum switched pretty strongly.
In Kentucky or nationwide?
Nationwide.
Yes, that was true.
Yeah.
That was very true.
Yeah, we had a meeting right before the general election. We had a private meeting, so to speak. They called a bunch of us who were area state directors, state managers into Washington for a meeting, sort of last couple of weeks meeting, see whatever. And I'll never forget Bob Strauss, who was chairman of the National Party, a very strong national leader, and all of us were in there, and it was just a worn-out group of folks. Mm-hmm. And we thought the press wasn't around. We didn't think there was any press to it. It was in a Washington hotel. And came a knock on the door, and somebody said, "The reporter wants somebody to come out here to talk to us." So Beckel was the most loudmouth of the bunch, so we sent Beckel out there to talk to him. But it was tough.
President Carter got in trouble really for conceding early in that race. While there's several congressmen in California claimed that they were defeated because of that. What is your judgment of that?
I was so wrapped up in Kentucky, I wasn't really, and I was tired too. I didn't really focus on that very much. But I'll tell you a little aside. The night we were down in the hotel in Louisville getting all the results in, Governor John Y. Brown was standing right behind me, and as you said, Carter conceded real early. Well, in 2 seconds, I hear John Y. Brown say, "Well, I better go down and congratulate the guy who was the Northie, whatever, who was running the campaign for Reagan down the hall." And I was tired. I turned around to him. I said, "So soon?" But it wasn't 2 seconds. He said, "I got to go down and congratulate so-and-so." Yeah. So, there was some criticism about that, but I don't know that it would change a lot of races. I just don't. I don't know how that would have gone.
So, what was the feeling of the Carter group? Were you very familiar with the Georgia Mafia, the so-called Georgia Mafia?
Well, I was never really a part of it as such, but while I was Democratic Party director, I went to Washington fairly often, and I'd go to the White House for things. I got invited to the White House for things, and with Hamilton and Jody and Frank Moore, and I always had a real good relationship with him, but I was not. Although Jay Beck and I are very close friends right now, but I know him, and I know that one of the criticisms they got was that when they first got to Washington, I think it was probably a mistake, but when they first got to Washington in office, Georgetown people, used to having the White House kowtow them to them, all the rich folks, and they would invite Hamilton or Jody or some of them out to one of their parties, and they'd turn it down and go somewhere and have a beer because the same people that wanted them out there now to be be there with the same people who were turning their nose down at them 3 months earlier. And if you know anything about Carter people, they don't forget much. And so I think that was probably a mistake on their part. I think they probably should have been more forgiving and at least trying to bury the hatchet, so to speak. But that's just the way things were. I remember. That's just the way things were.
They were severely criticized for their relations with Congress.
And I think probably some of that was not. I think you've seen the same thing happen with the Obama administration too. But I think it's different from the Obama administration because at this juncture, I just read a book recently where the story was accurate because it hasn't been refuted that the night of Obama's administration's inaugural ball, Newt Gingrich, the leadership of the Senate and House, 4 or 5 others met in Haley Barber's restaurant to decide how they were going to try to get power back. And the thing they came out of there agreeing was that they were going to oppose everything Obama did. No matter what it was, they were going to oppose it. Mm-hmm. And they have. You can see that's happened. I don't think that was the attitude prevailing in the Carter time. But I think there was still some, he was an outsider. He had very little support. Carter had a very little support among the political folks. And rather than mending bridges and whatever, I think they made some mistakes there. There's an axiom, and I think probably is true, and that is that the people who can get you elected are not necessarily the best ones to run the government.
Right.
So I think that may be true.
There was an accusation I read just yesterday that the administration was too arrogant. Is that a fair assessment?
Talking about Carter's administration?
Yeah, Carter.
Well, I went with Frank Moore one day. I was in Washington at the White House, and he was going up to the Capitol Hill to try to talk to some legislators about a bill, and I went along with him. And you know Frank Moore. Frank Moore's he's a pretty laid back guy, probably, yeah. And I didn't see a lot of problems that day in his being able to talk to some people. Now there may have been some other folks on the staff who were more proud of themselves. Maybe I work for the president, I'm in the White House, and I'm here to tell you what to do kind of attitude. May have been some of that. Usually isn't every administration. Mm-hmm. But I think, of course, he got off on the wrong foot. Hamilton did with the speaker. Mm-hmm. And as the speaker goes, so goes the party, so to speak, in your side of the house. That's and maybe true. That had something to do with it.
Yeah. Charlie, looking back over the Busbee administration, I think it's important for history to record and for people to know that had it been for George Busbee, Governor Carter's reorganization program probably never would have worked.
Well, that's true, and I expect that one of the things you have to realize is that back in those days, the governor served 4 years, and a major reorganization of government can't take place in 4 years, especially if you've spent half that time trying to get it passed. So it's true, though, that I think Governor Carter in his reorganization reduced some 200 and something agencies down to 13. And so we had a new state government in effect that had to be not only put in place, but up and running. I think the reason that Busbee was able to do that effectively was his nature. He had some good people with him. Norman Underwood was a fantastic chief of staff. He had some really good, smart people working with him, but Busbee was a good leader. And he could insist on things without being rude about it. He could get things done. People wanted to do for him and trusted his judgment. So it fell his lot to do it, and he was able to do it. And I think that the truth of that is proven in the fact that it was Busbee who, during his administration, proposed that governors be allowed to succeed themselves. And that was a new thing for Georgia. Georgia had always sort of prided itself on being able to kick the governor out after 4 years. But due to his popularity, and had he not been popular, had he not done a good job, that amendment wouldn't have passed. And I was involved some to that degree because I was director of the Democratic Party, and of course, unofficially, I was a part of the Busbee team. And so that was and it has proved to be a good thing for a governor. We don't need to limit a governor to 4 years. It's too big a state, too big of programs, so that was a needed thing, and Busbee was able to do it.
What was the personal relationship between Carter and Busbee?
I think they had a fairly good relationship. It was cordial. I don't know that. I don't really know the total background for it, but I never saw when I was involved any animosity, open animosity for it. Certainly, Busbee came from the Sanders camp. He was a follower, a protege, so to speak, or a compatriot of Governor Sanders, whom I greatly admire for what he did for Georgia. But that was Busbee's camp. Busbee was in that camp, and of course, Carter and Busbee had a tough. Sanders, Carter and Sanders had a tough campaign, a rough, dirty, somewhat some would say a dirty campaign, and so Busbee was in that middle. But I never really saw that. I think they were both professional and went about their business as they should have.
Well, that Carter-Sanders relationship didn't affect Governor Busbee when it came to Governor Carter's presidential campaign.
Well, he was encouraged. Governor Busbee was encouraged by some in the party. In fact, our chairman. There was a feeling that perhaps the Democratic Party should remain neutral in the primary, because we hadn't not yet picked our standard bearer for the general election. So regardless of who was running, that we should remain neutral. Of course, Carter was a native son, a favorite son of Georgia, and there were those who felt that at some point Governor Busbee should show his support to lend credibility to Carter's candidacy. And I was one of those who felt that way. Because I thought, first of all, Carter had a strong. If you remember the Peanut Brigades, he had there was always a split, but he had a strong following in Georgia too, and so I was concerned that those people might turn against Busbee because of that. And I actually went as the campaign, the primary season was going on, and Busbee was getting pressure not to say anything. I went to him one day and I said to him, Governor, I think these are the reasons why you ought to go ahead and come out for Governor Carter. And that was fairly early in the campaign, the primary season, so he didn't make the decision to do that at that time. As the campaign season went forward and it got closer, and I remember we were right near the Pennsylvania primary, and Carter was making a pretty good showing around the country, and Pennsylvania was going to turn out to be pretty much the decision maker. And I went back to Governor Busbee privately, myself, and I said, Governor Busbee, he may well win this Pennsylvania primary. If he does, he's going to be the nominee. If he doesn't win, he may lose out. He may lose steam, and he may not win, and you're going to get blamed for it. So either way, you're going to be in the box, but I think you're smarter to wait. And he said, and I don't know why this hadn't happened before, but he said, well, I haven't been asked to endorse Governor Carter. And I think that was a mistake on the Carter campaign's fault. They should have done that. And so I said, well, I'll take care of that. So I went over to see Bert Lance at the bank, National Bank. And Bert Lance, of course, was one of Jimmy Carter's closest friends. And I talked to Bert, told him what the situation was, and he said, I'll take care of it. And a couple, 3 days later, Governor Carter did go out to the mansion, and Governor Busbee did publicly endorse him, and the rest of that's history.
Well, Charlie, you had a great life. Anything else you want to tell us? No,
it's just a pleasure to be here. I'm proud to have been a Georgian, have been able to as I said, a kid that grew up poor and no background at all, to be able to do and see some of the things I've seen. I think a testament to the kind of society we have and a government we have, a country we have to live in. And you and I have had a long friendship, and I hope it continues for many years to come, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, sir.